Hello everyone, welcome to my subject Literary Criticism. I am Siraj Khan, lecturer in English guest. Our subject code is English 3341, lecture number 5. Today we are going to talk about one of the greatest work after the poetics in the history of English literature, On the Sublime, written by Longinus. The outlines of today's lecture are Longinus, who was Longinus, his work On the Sublime, his true sense of poetry, poetry's form and subject, sources of sublimity, effects of sublimity, Longinus' thoughts on literature. The sublime. When our intellects, our emotions, our wills harmoniously respond to a given work of art, we know we have been touched by the sublime. Longinus, or Pseudo-Longinus. Its author is unknown but is conventionally referred to as Longinus or Pseudo-Longinus. It is regarded as a classic work on aesthetics and the effects of good writing. He talked about the aesthetics and the effects of good writing. The treatise highlights examples of good and bad writing from the previous millennium, focusing on particularly on what may lead to the sublime. Before Longinus, the critics believed that the function of poetry was to instruct or to delight, or both, and if it is prose, its function was to persuade also. But Longinus was not satisfied with this formula. Now, Cassius Longinus was a writer from the 3rd century AD, and this work On the Sublime was actually written in the 1st century, though the identity of its original writer is obscure, not clear, but this is a work attached to Longinus. A classic work on aesthetics. He wrote this On the Sublime as a first romantic. Pseudo-Longinus or Longinus was considered the first romantic critic of English literature, and he was the first who brought romantic ideology into literature. Literature is not only for entertainment or for altering our thoughts, it takes us into sublimity. He was the first to involve imagination in literature. The effects of good writing, what is good and what is bad writing, he wrote about that. He was very much inspired from Plato rather than Aristotle, focusing particularly on what may lead to the sublimity. The aim of a great work of art is to transport the reader out of himself. It has a capacity to move the reader to divine joy. This is the philosophy of sublime. sublime. True sense of poetry. As before Longinus, or previously, it was poetry was to instruct or to delight. That was the purpose of poetry, or both. And if it is prose, its function was to persuade also. But according to Longinus, that a great work of art does not only please or instruct, but it also moves, transports, elevates. It pleases all, and it pleases all the time. The aim of a great work of art is to transport the reader out of himself. It takes us away from our physical world. It has a capacity to move the reader to divine joy, to find himself in the space, up above in the world of his imaginations, as he was the first to bring that romantic ideology and the power of emotions into literature. His concept of transportation, movement, elevation, and that leads to sublimity. As a great work of art does not only please, it transports us, it elevates us, and it moves us, and that leads to sublimity. Nothing is poetry unless it transports, he believed. According to him, the great work of art becomes excellent when it has power to sublimate. By sublimity, Longinus means elevation or loftiness, or a certain distinction and excellence in composition. Its form. And the sublime is both a treatise on aesthetics and a work of literary criticism. It is written in an epistolary form, and the final part, possibly dealing with public speaking, has been lost. And the sublime is a compendium of literary exemplars with about 50 authors spanning 1,000 years mentioned or quoted. Along with the expected examples from Homer and other figures of Greek culture, Longinus refers to a passage from Genesis which is quite unusual for the first century. Genesis was the first book of Bible. It's a great work of literary criticism, and it has been called the first romantic work in literary criticism. Its form is epistolary form. In the manner of written correspondence. It is a compendium of literary exemplars with about 50 authors spanning 1,000 years mentioned or quoted. And it refers to a passage from Genesis which is quite unusual for the first century, and that was the reason of not believing that this work is from Longinus. The sublime. Longinus critically applauds and condemns certain literary works as examples of good or bad styles of writing. Longinus ultimately promotes an elevation of style and an essence of simplicity. To quote this famous author, the first and most important source of sublimity is the power of forming great concept. The concept of the sublime is generally accepted to refer to a style of writing that elevates itself above the ordinary. An elevation of style and essence of simplicity. The power of forming great conception. In sublime, it is a style of writing that elevates itself above the ordinary. Longinus sets out 5 sources of sublimity: great thoughts, great thoughts, strong emotions, certain figures of thought in speech, noble diction, and dignified words arrangement. The writer must have great thoughts that arise, strong emotions, must use great figures of speeches, his diction must be noble, and the selection and arrangement of words. The effects of sublimity. The effects of the sublimity are the sublime are loss of rationality, an alienation leading to identification with the creative process of the artist, and a deep emotion mixed in pleasure and exaltation. An example of sublime which the author quotes in the work is a poem by Sappho, the so-called Ode to Jealousy, defined as a sublime ode. To arouse emotion in his audience, a writer's goal is not so much to express empty feelings, but to arouse emotion in his audience. Thoughts on literature. He thought that literature could model a soul, and that a soul could pour itself out into a work of art. The source of the sublime are of 2 kinds, according to Longinus. Inborn sources, aspiration to vigorous concepts and strong and enthusiastic passion. Inacquirable sources, rhetorical devices, choice of the right lexicon, and dignified and high composition. Now the inborns, the aspiration, that is the thoughts and feelings and imaginations of the writer. And acquirable sources, where he used a dignified style in language. Then the sublime is a mechanism of recognition arising from the impact of the work of art, of the greatness of spirit, of the depth of an idea, of the power of speech. Thus, Longinus is the golden balance between Plato and Aristotle, Homer and Shelley, classicism and romanticism, down to Eliot's modernism. And the sublime is a Roman era Greek work of literary criticism, and this word sublime truly means the essentials of a noble and impressive style. And this is what he first created the Romantic ideology in English literature. As a critic, he displays a rare breadth and universality of outlook. Moreover, his mind is free from any prejudice. His judgments are essentially apt. They have been supported by posterity. Atkin says that there are, in short, many respects in which Longinus stands high as a judicial critic. His mind is free from prejudice. A great deal of his work is original and illuminating and is of permanent or universal significance. He attaches importance to emotion, imagination, and beauty of words. He thus becomes a pioneer in the field of aesthetic appreciation. He finds the permanent and universal qualities in the works of Homer. According to him, the function of literature is not didactic but aesthetic. That is why Scott James calls him the first romantic critic, but Atkins calls him an exponent, exemplary if real classic spirit. Sublimity is the echo of a great soul, of a lofty mind. It is not merely an excellence in language. The purpose of the greatest writers has been to introduce, to delight, and to persuade. But their greatness lies in sublimity. Sublimity is the echo of a great soul, of a lofty mind. It is not merely an excellence in language. It is the note that rings from a great mind. It lies in intensity, and a certain distinction and consummation of excellence in expression. A work of genius must aim at ecstasy. In other words, it is the combination of the true, the good, and the beautiful that makes a work. Thank you very much and good luck.